happy Thursday. Welcome back to another episode. So just a few things off the top. I am launching a new newsletter. So it'll be released at the beginning of every month. It'll be going over the episodes, what to expect and when they're going to be released, what movies I'll be doing. It's also going to go over the new blog that's launched. I've done a few updates. I've created a website. So there's a blog now, it's called Reels and Tunes, just a small reference to like newsreels and cartoons that used to air before movies when you went and saw them in the theater. So we'll be doing that every week. Those will be released on Mondays, and then normally the episodes on Thursdays. So at the beginning of every month in the newsletter, you will be able to see what the whole month is going to be, what's being released and when. So you're just going to go to the getyourpopcornpodcast.com. There's a link to subscribe to the newsletter. There's also the access to Reels and Tunes blog. There's some pretty exciting stuff. I've also dropped merch, so if you're interested in that, that's also available through the website. The distributor I have is a Canadian company, and I'm only distributing to Canada as well. Given what's going on, for all my Canadian listeners out there, please make sure that you're supporting Canadian companies, Canadian products, and if it's within your means, like do the best you can to buy all Canadian products. And I encourage everybody that if you have any plans to go to the United States, especially if it's for like pleasure trips or things that like are not necessities, cancel them. I can't encourage that enough. You don't need to be going right now. Why are you engaging in supporting somebody that would do that to our country? There's plenty of other countries if you want to go and support them and give to their economy, but the United States is trying to tariff us into recession because they want to take over. They have threatened it. They want to make us the 51st state. Why? Why on earth would you go? Nothing in your personal life could possibly outweigh that. Yeah. So I'm encouraging you. People are going to do whatever they're going to do, but if you're at a point where you're able to spend on a luxury trip, I think maybe you need to really rethink that. So today's movie that we're gonna do is Anora. I'm so excited about this film, guys. I watched it initially when it first came out. I streamed it on my computer, which is not the way it should be seen. And so my local theater, after it won Best Picture, was screening it again for like a weekly limited release. So I went and saw it with my husband, and upon second viewing, oh my God, I was left stunned and shattered, and this is actually now my favorite movie of all time. I've pretty consistently had Silver Linings Playbook at the top of my list since about 2012. Nosferatu was making a good contender, but Anora blew every other film I've ever watched out of the park. Mikey Madison, even more than I loved her on the initial run. I was so much more impressed. She was so much more nuanced. I was able to get so much more out of the film. The way she pulled me in and gripped me throughout the entire performance was outstanding. And I left the film shattered and just bawling. It was incredible. I can't overstate enough how much I loved this film. Everything. It was just perfect. It's perfect. I loved it. All of the performances were so good. And it was funny, and it was heartbreaking, and it felt real, and there was so much in it that I just got from the film. And it's one of those films that was so good and broke my heart so much that I'm like, this is my favorite movie. I will not be viewing it again for at least 5 years because I need to emotionally recover. It was so good, guys. I can't recommend it enough. I do think it's very important to Google the plot before you go, like the synopsis, because there's a lot of people in my theater that I felt didn't know what they were getting into. So there's the opening shot, and it's just like, it pans across like a strip club, and it's just, you're just seeing like butts in your face. And there's a lot of like older people that seemed quite scandalized by this. It's like, my friend, the internet is a thing. You can take a little looky-loo at what you're going on. Because essentially this film is broken into, I'd say, like two halves, essentially. The first half is essentially sex and drug use. And the second half is kind of almost has like a thriller element. There's a missing person they're looking for. Like, it's quite a different tone that is executed quite well, actually. But the first one is very like fun and lively. There's lots of strip club scenes, there's tons of sex scenes, there's lots and lots of cocaine use. Yeah, so like, know what you're getting into. I'm a rather adventurous moviegoer. I'm kind of up for anything, given the fact that my top two favorite films are Anora and Nosferatu. Like, I'm pretty good with whatever's hitting the screen, as long as it's directed well, acted well, and the script's great. I don't care. Like, just hit me with a story. Actually, you know, I gotta call attention. I'm not balding. I just have really blonde and gray. And actually, I discovered this today. White roots coming in, so that's great. And I need to do my hair. That's why it's up. Anyway, I'm not balding. Maybe it's just me that's looking at that. And yeah, I'm not balding. I swear. I just have blonde roots and gray roots. Yeah, so this film came out at the end of 2024. It's directed by Sean Baker, written by Sean Baker, edited by Sean Baker. He won Academy Awards for all of those. It stars Mikey Madison as Anora. I hadn't seen her in anything before this other than Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. She plays one of the Manson family members. She goes to the house of Rick Dalton and she interacts with Cliff Booth, and she's actually murdered pretty savagely by Cliff Booth. She's the one that receives the flamethrower to the face. And then we have Mark Edelstein. He plays Ivan, or Vanya, as he's referred to in the film. He's the wealthy son of a Russian oligarch. We have Yuri Borzov as Igor. He's sort of a henchman of not the family, he's kind of a lower rung for Toros, who is an Armenian handler of Vanya's. He's played by Kara Gillan. We have Vashi Tovamastin as Garnik. He's an Armenian henchman. He's Toros's brother. We have Alexei Sherbakov as Nikolai Zarkov. That's Vanya's father. We have Darnya Ekesmova as Galina Zarkov. Sorry, as Zerlina Zakharova. That's Vanya's mother. And the way the Russian language works, Zarkova is the the male-female translation of the word. We have Luna Miranda as Lulu. She's a friend of Annie's. We have Lindsay Normington as Diamond. She works with Annie. She's Annie's sort of rival, this other girl that works at the strip club where Annie works. She's not a nice person. And so those are kind of the more main players of the film. Like I said, Sean Baker was the creator, director, writer, editor of this entire film. He based it on a story he'd heard from a friend about a Russian-American newlywed who was kidnapped for collateral. He also was inspired by his own editing of Russian-Americans in New York when he used to edit wedding videos. He cast Mikey Madison without actually auditioning her, just based on seeing her Once Upon a Time in Hollywood and Scream. Mikey Madison had to study to learn Russian for 6 months because Sean Baker wanted her to sound really authentic. And like she really spoke Russian, because Annie's character speaks both English and Russian. She learned it from her grandmother, supposedly. It was very important that she sounded really authentic. The review from the Russian media has said that she does sound really, really authentic and like she's a native Russian speaker. So good job, Mikey Madison. Mikey Madison also worked really hard at pole dancing in order to look really authentic in the strip club. However, when the production found a strip club that they could use in film it actually wasn't a pole club. It was just like a dance club. So Mikey Madison actually asked Sean Baker to add a tiny scene where she's on the pole just because she worked so hard for so long. So principal photography took place in February 2023 in Brooklyn, and Anora was shot over 37 days. And with the home invasion scene where we are first meeting Igor and Toros, and the film takes its kind of hard left turn, shot over 10 days. And bless Sean Baker, he shot on film, Kodak 35mm film. We love to see it. I fucking hate digital. If you're a fan of the pod and a long-time listener, I bitch about digital. I think it takes a warmth out of filmmaking. I think there's something about not having hours and hours and hours of digital retakes and retakes and retakes, having to focus in on the performance, having a bit of a conscious keeping in mind of how your performance is because you only have so many feet of film and you're wanting to keep under budget that way, I think adds an element to it that's almost like a theater performance. Like you're working for this. The film is almost an audience, in my opinion. I think actors perform a little bit differently for film, and I think it adds a warmth to the film just in the way that it's shot that isn't in digital. Yeah, there's just something to it that I think film is really important, especially we're calling it film. So if we're shooting without film, how is it film? Anyway, I digress. So one of the things about this film that kind of caused a little bit of controversy was because there is so many sex scenes in the film, Mikey Madison actually turned down to have an intimacy coordinator because she felt quite comfortable with her two partners that are present within the film and with the director. Intimacy coordinators, I'll give you a little definition of them. They're essentially an advocate and a liaison between the actors and the production, and they sort of help with choreography of the nudity scenes and the simulated sex and other sort of like intimate parts, just to make sure that like everybody feels comfortable on set, from production to actors to crew. Like they're in charge of making sure that that goes smoothly. The sort of rise of them comes after the Harvey Weinstein productions and the scandals with the Miramax and stuff. So they've been quite popular. Mikey Madison turned down that. She was very comfortable with her decision. And you know what? I think that is her choice, and if she felt comfortable and the actors felt comfortable and everything, you know, it's an independent film, so it's a small budget. I think you can tell from interviews and the way that the actors interact with each other and Sean Baker on sets and things like that, and the way they speak about each other, this was a very close-knit cast. So I think if that's Mikey Madison and the other actors' decision, then like it's not my place or the media's place or anybody else's to comment on that. If everybody on that film felt fine, great. So the film premiered last year at Cannes Film Festival and actually won the Palme d'Or. It earned a 10-minute standing ovation on its first screening. It also played at the Toronto International Film Festival, the New York Film Festival, and the San Sebastian International Film Festival, the Rome Film Festival, the BFI London Film Festival, and the Busan International Film Festival, and several others. The film was released on digital platforms in December 17th, 2024, and there'll be a streaming release on Hulu March 17th, and will be released on Ultra HD, Blu-ray, and I'm assuming DVD on April 29th, hopefully DVD. I assume I have mentioned on here that I'm a big DVD gal. I buy everything on DVD. I bought Wicked, I bought Nosferatu, things I like. I love having like a tangible thing, and I hate that they take stuff off Disney Plus or whatever, Netflix, Amazon Prime, although I've canceled my Amazon Prime now with all this stuff going on because fuck Jeff Bezos. Yeah. So I hope they release it on DVD. So it absolutely swept its Oscar categories, winning 5 of the 6 it was nominated for. It won Best Picture, it won Best Director, Best Actress, Best Original Screenplay, and Best Film Editing. So Sean Baker walked away with 4 out of 4 of the categories he was nominated in. That's Best Picture for his producing, Best Director, for obvious reasons, he wrote the screenplay and edited the film. Mikey Madison obviously won for Best Actress, which I was so happy for. She was hands down the best performance of the year. And then Yura Borzov was nominated for Best Supporting Actor, but ended up losing to Kieran Culkin. It was a tough category. I did think Kieran Culkin's performance was... I think he appeared more in the film and had a bit stronger of a performance in the supporting actor category. Yura Borzov was great, but a lot of his performance was very subtle. His character's a lot more quiet, and it's a lot of his performance is in the background of the film, which I think people don't always pay attention to. His acting is tremendous, but a lot of his acting is reacting to what's going on around him. So I understand why that wasn't so much of a award-winning kind of grab as Kieran Culkin's performance, but I'm really excited to see what he does next. The other thing I want to chat about with this film is, of course, she works at a strip club. She's a sex worker. It isn't super clear whether or not she just strips normally and then engages in more intimate sex work just in this one occasion, or it is more something she's doing regularly. There's been a lot of praise from sex workers themselves, saying that this was a much more well-rounded portrayal of sex work than I think we see in films. A lot of times and by a lot of times I mean most of the time, it's either a stripper with a heart of gold and their work is really like looked down upon, or we see that somebody has gotten into stripping or sex work because they're really down on their luck and it's the only thing that they were able to do, and it's really looked down upon. Where Anora doesn't portray it this way. I had a really good conversation with my husband about the way that sex work is portrayed in the film. Anora is a very strong character. It's very clear that she is very good at her job. The way that she is able to speak to men and the way she dances, the way she moves, and kind of the power she has with her body and her self-control is really kind of impressive. And it's interesting because the way that the audience is meant to view Anora and the way that the other characters view Anora is very different, because we see Anora for her power and her strength, the audience, and we as the audience don't look down upon her. And so to see the other characters kind of attack her for her job, they call her prostitute, they look down on her, they call her a whore. I think that is only said in Russian, but that's what's happening. That's what she's being reduced to, that you feel quite personally almost offended on her behalf, because you like her and you know, hey, like that's not all she is. Like her work is it might not be your choice, but that is the choice she's making, and she's quite powerful and strong in her decisions. So who is anybody else to say that that's right or wrong? That's for somebody's own personal decision. Is that within what you would feel comfortable with? And that's not something that anybody else can comment on for another person. So I just wanted to bring that to attention, that the sex worker community has been quite pleased with the way that this film handles sex work. So I think that that's great. I think we spend a lot of time in our society shaming women for being sexual or having any sort of power in that. I think it's a combination of puritanical values and then the concern from feminists that these women are being taken advantage of. And I think unfortunately that the sex workers are getting it kind of from both sides, a lot of judgment, a lot of sort of unfair opinions on what they're choosing to do with their life and their bodies. And I think I want to say this with my whole chest: your body, your choice. I feel that in absolutely all definitions of the word, your body, your choice. And so to have a film where we as the audience are not placing any judgment on another person, I think that's really good. I think that's a step in the right direction. So let's get into the plot. So Anora, or Annie as she's called, Makiva, is a 23-year-old stripper. She's lives in New York. She's a Russian American. She works at a club called Headquarters. Our opening shot is the dancers, and we see Annie, and she's interacting with the different men. And you can see that Annie has a lot of power, a lot of control. She's very good at her job. So we see kind of her flipping back. We see a lot of how the men interact with her, a lot of some of the kind of negative things she has to deal with in her job. We see her interact with another worker called Diamond, who they obviously have some beef. They're kind of sniping back at each other. Her boss comes in and tells her that there is a Russian oligarch's son. His name is Vanya, and he wants somebody who speaks Russian. So she is able to work with him because she speaks Russian fluently, because her grandmother doesn't know any English. And so they sit down and they meet, and there's kind of this like instant chemistry with Vanya and Annie. I think she finds him kind of endearing in the way that he's trying to communicate with her. He's very complimentary of her ability to speak Russian, of the way she looks. He finds her quite engaging, quite funny. And there's a lot of kind of flirting going back and forth that you can see is kind of shifting from the professional flirting, which she does. And she's quite good at for a living. It's all done sort of with her facial expressions and stuff, that you see that she's kind of drawn in by Vanya. She finds him she finds him endearing. I think, and this is where we see sort of the trajectory of Annie and Vanya, is I think that Annie interprets a lot of his kind of naivety about sort of the US and some of his immaturity and about the language. I think she perceives it as endearing, and she perceives it as naivety more so than his like immaturity and the spoiled nature in which he is. He's a Russian oligarch's son. This boy's never been told no in his life, really. He kind of gets everything he wants. And so it's almost like a lack of caring, but I think with a little bit of a language barrier and a cultural barrier, she perceives it as naive and endearing. And that's not really what it is. And for those of you that don't know, I have a little bit of experience with this, but the culture of the Russian people and of the West are they're very, very different. The way that they interact with the world is very different. The media and the way that cultural norms are and stuff is extremely different. And I think we forget that sometimes. And so there's just these little moments. And I think if you haven't been around a lot of Russian people, you don't necessarily think that that's going to be the case. And it was really kind of interesting to see, and like I found to be really authentic, of the way that the Russian characters speak and interact with each other is very authentically Russian. And you can tell that a lot of work was done to make it authentic. It does not appear to be a Western look at Russian culture. It appears to be a very accurate portrayal of Russian culture, Russian humor, Russian identity. I thought that was incredibly well done. And I don't know if you don't have a lot of experience with Russian culture, whether or not you would get how well done that was, but Sean Baker executed it wonderfully. It was really great to see, and I was kind of smiling through it because I was like, oh my God, like this is so well done. Because I think we think sometimes there's often like a Boris and Natasha level portrayal of Russian culture in the movies and stuff that we watch here in the West, from the Rocky and Bullwinkle show, like just utter like nonsense that it has nothing to do with like actual Russians or the way that they are. And so it was good to see some of that, especially some of the humor and stuff. Like they are very, very, very funny people. And I mean that like in a humorous way, like they're great in that way. And I think we always just frame them as like these bad guys are super serious, and they're not. They're just more reserved in public. And then when they're comfortable and stuff, they're extremely funny and warm. And it was good to see. So Vanya's character, he's here essentially supposedly to study before he goes to work for his father's company back in Russia, but he spends most of his time partying and playing video games in his giant mansion. So he takes a liking to Anora, and he hires her as an escort, is what they refer to it as. Again, like I don't know all the proper wording for everything, so I'm really sorry if I say anything that's kind of offensive. It's really not at all what I mean. So he hires her to stay with him for kind of a week and be his girlfriend, so he says, for $15,000. They start to have some sexual encounters, and Vanya appears to be rather inexperienced. Going back and now seeing the film a second time, I don't think that's what it is. I think Anora reads it as inexperienced, and she finds that endearing and charming. But what I think it is he is a guy that just has gotten what he wants the whole time in his life. And so he, in all aspects of what he does in his life, isn't thinking about anybody else other than himself. So she's trying to like teach him stuff. And I think he's never quite thought, oh yeah, there's another person involved in this. And so going back and watching it a second time, like that's what clicked in my head. But Anora's character sees this as inexperienced, and she finds it endearing, kind of heartwarming. And it helps, she's starting to connect with Vanya because of this. And they have like a lot of really cute kind of flirting interactions that are, they're kind of subtle and they're small, but it really does seem like they're starting to like each other a lot. He invites her to his New Year's Eve party, and his friends are like kind of talking behind his back, like, oh my God, like she's a prostitute is what they're calling her. Like, they're kind of making fun of him behind his back, but it seems that he really likes Annie and he wants her company. So during this whole week, they decide that they're going to go to Las Vegas, and they go and they get this absolutely crazy suite. And there's tons and tons of drug use. There's these scenes of them walking through the lobby. They've got the jacuzzi. They're getting quite drunk. Yeah, lots of sex, lots of drug use. It's kind of repeated scenes with like slightly every single interaction that we see is progressively showing Vanya's kind of spoiled nature and what he's able to get away with, as well as him and Anora's kind of sweet interactions where you can tell that they really like each other, but now they have this kind of transactional thing where she is hired as a sex worker for Vanya, but there is real feelings now involved. So one night they're kind of staying there, and she kind of says to him, like, when you go back to Russia, I'm going to miss you. And he says, yeah, I think the only way I could stay in the country is if I got married. And then she's like, oh, well, who would you marry? And they start listing kind of these people, different women that work at the club and some of the people that they know. And he said, oh, I could get married to you. And she like laughed. She's like, don't play me. Like, I don't joke with me about that. And he says, no, I'm serious. Let's get married. And then he says this really cute thing because, you know, his English is not good. He's like, I've asked you twicely. And she agrees. And then there's this scene where they, you know, run into the little white chapel and they get married. And this made me bawl because I know what's coming. But it's really sweet, and you can see there's kind of just this like magic on her face. And I think as little girls, we're all told to wait for this like fairy tale experience. I think whether we like it or not, we are kind of programmed for that a little bit. And I think, at least for me, I mean, this is obviously not how my life turned out. Not that I wanted to marry a Russian oligarch's son, but I mean this like magic, you know, you like meet somebody and they are so in love with you right away. They propose to you within like weeks, and then you're, you know, you go off and you get married, and then you have this incredibly fairy tale happy life together. And there's just this expression on Mikey Madison's face, or Anora's face, and she just glows. And they have this kind of great scene where then they're going through downtown Las Vegas, or by the, I think it's called the Golden Horseshoe, the Golden Nugget. They're outside on that street there, and it's shot from kind of down below, and you can see all the lights going on, and Vanya screaming like, this is my wife, I'm an American. Like, it's just this amazing celebration, and she's so happy. But then what happens next is they go back to the mansion, and they're married, and he buys her this big ring and this mink coat, and they're at the mansion, and Vanya is just kind of playing video games and just being kind of like he's very immature. He isn't really thinking about what's happened, but Anora is very clearly like, this is my husband. She feels very settled, very excited that like she's very much taking everything very seriously. And so news has now gotten back to Russia, that his parents, who are very wealthy, very well connected, that their son has married a sex worker, and they are furious, and they are coming to America to get the marriage annulled. So Vanya's mother, whose name is Galina, orders her Armenian godfather Toros to find them and get the wedding annulled by the time that they get there, so they can take Vanya back to Russia. So Toros, because he is at a baptism that he ends up having to leave early, sends his two henchmen, Garnik, who's his brother, and Igor, who's played by Igor Borzov, to the mansion. So there's this like, you know, Anya and Vanya are kind of going between playing video games and being intimate. We're still in that part of the scene where they're like newlyweds and that's all they do. Yeah, don't go see this movie with your family. Please don't see it with your family. And they basically bang down the door, and Toros is on speakerphone, and Vanya's trying to get them out. He's like, get out, like, I got married, like, get out of my house, get out of my mansion. He's trying to lock them out. But of course this isn't his mansion. None of this is his. None of this is real. This is his parents. He's immature. He sort of kind of sold Anora this lie that this is all his life, but it's his parents' life that's been bought and paid for, and funded. This isn't his. He doesn't work for anything. He shows them the marriage license that states that these are real. And so Toros is trying to get there, and the henchmen are there, and Vanya realizes his parents are coming and panics. And he's like, we have to leave. But Anora, because when they busted in, where they were in the middle of being intimate, isn't wearing any pants. And so she like runs upstairs to get pants, and Vanya just takes off. And his henchman Garnik chases after him, and he slips in the driveway, and Vanya gets away. And he leaves Anora. He abandons his wife. And this is where we start to see a lot more clearly, like if you don't know what you're looking for, that Vanya doesn't really, he isn't acting like a husband. This is kind of this fun fantasy that he's then indulged. This isn't legit. But Anora doesn't know that. Anora still thinks that everything, they've fallen in love, like this is forever, like she hasn't come to this realization yet. And so they kind of make Anora extremely upset, because they are telling her that her marriage is a farce, that it is, he only married her for a green card, it isn't real, he's too immature, and they are going to ensure that she gets annulled. Anora gets mad, and they try to kind of subdue her to keep her there because Vanya has now escaped. And she isn't going down without a fight. She's really offended by the things they've said. They're calling her a prostitute. Igor tries to kind of restrain her, and she ends up assaulting him quite badly. So he restrains her and ties her up with a telephone cord. And, you know, it's this very long extended scene. She ends up, while she's being restrained, breaking Garnick's nose. And they destroy the house. And so Igor is holding her extremely tight. And then Toros comes in and he sees the destroyed house and that Anora has beat up these two henchmen. And he's like, she's a little girl. Like, what is happening? And so she's trying to scream at Toros and say, no, this marriage is real. We're in love. And he's like, no, you're not. He's immature. He's a boy. None of this is his. Like, are you stupid? Like, and she is defending her marriage. She's like, Vanya won't. And she's like, he left you. He left you. He's not answering your calls. He doesn't love you. That's not how you treat somebody that you love. He then confiscates her wedding ring and gags her and says, you'll get paid $10,000 for the annulment. Anora insists that, you know, he loves her, but she does agree to help find him. And before they gag her, there's this scene where she's screaming and she's screaming and she's screaming, and Igor says, stop screaming, stop screaming. And there's there's laughter from the audience, but like her like blood-curdling scream, it just haunted me. It made me, I burst into tears during the scene. It like flips between being like, you know, a lot of the dialogue is really funny, and then you're like just racked. Like, I just bawled. Like, it was so upsetting. It was so upsetting because you're watching you're watching Fear. She's terrified she's going to get raped. She doesn't know these men. She's come in to this mansion. She's thought that one thing is happening. They're trying to put cracks in her marriage, and you're watching her dreams start to shatter. And I just was so, my heart began to break for her, and I just started like crying during this part. So Anora and Toros and Garnick search Brooklyn, and they're looking everywhere for him. And this scene is really funny. We're kind of getting to know Igor during this a bit, and he has a very good understanding of what's happening, and his heart is starting to break for Anora. He feels horrible that this has happened to her, and that all of this is going on. And there's these little gestures that he does. He's kind of checking on her, making sure she's not cold. Like, they're walking through the streets, it's really cold, and he gives her a scarf. It's actually the scarf that she was gagged with, and she was like, what the fuck? But there's like this interaction, and it's very clear that Igor, although his line of work is very questionable, he really cares. He's starting to care for her, and he's kind of intrigued by her. And so there's just these little moments as they're going through. This is, you know, a good extended part, but it's really funny, just the interactions between all the characters. And, you know, Vanya's not answering his calls, so they go and they hunt around to all his different friends to try and find him. And eventually they get wind that he's at a strip club. So they find Vanya, and they find him at headquarters, which is the club in which Anora works. And he is absolutely drunk and drugged out of his mind. He's getting a dance from Diamond, who is the dancer that Anora has sort of this rivalry with. They had an altercation before Anora left the club to be with Vanya. And so as soon as Vanya stumbles in, drunk out of his mind, Diamond sort of makes a beeline to go and be his dancer just out of spite, which is horrible. And then seeing Anora find him with Diamond naked all over him is just this extra level of heartbreak. She feels horrible. They carry Vanya out of the club, Toros and Garnick and Igor, and they kind of throw him in the car, and Anora's trying to talk to him, and he's just incapacitated. So they go to the courthouse, and they kind of wait. Vanya, in the morning, when they kind of strong-arm this judge into seeing them, is still way too messed up to get the divorce. They look at the papers, and because they got married in Nevada, they cannot get an annulment in New York. So they immediately go to the airport to meet his family at the private jet, and then they have to go to Las Vegas. And when they meet his family, Anora is trying to speak to the mom, and she just completely dismisses her. Anora's trying to speak to her in Russian and say, you know, I'm so happy to be part of this family, and is trying to reach out, and the mom she's like, you're a mistake, you're a hooker, you're never going to be part of this family, we're going and getting this annulled. and she's yelling at Vanya that he's like a national embarrassment. And Anora's trying to talk to Vanya, and he's going, you know, she's trying to talk to him, and she's saying, why are you listening to your family? Like, what are you doing? And she's begging him, and he turns around and he's like, we have to get on the fucking plane and we have to go fucking Vegas. And she says, so that's it, we're really getting divorced. And he said, of course, are you fucking stupid? And just the look on her face, like, I just like after this like fairy tale thing, just to watch it like shatter in her eyes was just like, just gut punching. And he kind of turns around afterwards and he says, like, let's go. And he said, thanks for making my last week in Vegas so fun. And in the background is Igor, and he just looks shattered for her. Like, he feels horrible. He feels horrible that she's being treated this way. There's so much judgment on her for what she does for work. And, you know, there's this underthread through the whole movie of like classism. You know, Anora and Igor come from very like working class immigrant families who are just trying to do what they need to do. And, you know, juxtaposed with these like Russian oligarchs with all this money, these higher class people that are looking down on them, despite the fact that they are using them in order to maintain their status. So there's this real understanding, I think, that Igor has for Anora, and this sort of even playing field in terms of class systems, and he does not judge Anora for what she does for work or her station in life. So they get on the plane and they're going to Vegas, and Anora starts kind of yelling at Vanya, and the family's having this conversation. They're like, you're getting back to Russia, you're getting this annulled, like, you're an embarrassment. And he's like kind of dismissing them, and she's saying, you know, Anora's screaming at her, she's like, you're fucking pathetic. And he is. And it was a terrible thing to do to somebody, to build them up and make these promises and propose to them when she told him, don't play me, don't do this. And then he did. And it's very clear that Anora is like a very guarded person through the film. It's too like hard for her to let somebody in. And she does. She lets Vanya in, and he destroys her. So they go to Vegas and they get it annulled. And once they sign the papers, Igor sort of says Vanya should apologize to Anora for what's happened. And Igor puts himself way on the line. Like, these are his boss. They're so powerful. It's his boss's boss, actually. And she says, my son's not apologizing to anybody. And then she says, you know, Anora's like, as she's leaving, she like turns around and she says, your son's a fucking pussy. And Galina says, what? And she said, you heard me, your son's a fucking pussy. And she said, and you're nothing but a hooker. And Nora says, oh yeah? She said, and your son hates you so much that he married one. And she leaves, which is iconic. Anora is iconic. I love her. This like strength and this like absolutely like attitude. I love it. So her and Igor get on the plane, and he, you know, takes her back to the mansion to collect her stuff. They spend one night there, and then she's got to go back to her house in the morning. They get the $10,000 that she's going to get for the annulment, and she has to go back to her life. The scene where they're sitting on the couch, and you can tell that Igor has this like really, you know, we're seeing more and more his like warmth for Anora, and he's kind of trying to flirt with her a little bit, and she's having none of it. And this is where we start to see that like real like Russian sense of humor and like kind of teasing and stuff that I think we don't normally see in like a West film. Like, Russians are always portrayed as like just straight bad guys, and we see this well-roundedness to Igor's character and the real authentic like Russian style like humor and his laugh, and we start to see that he is not, you know, what people think initially. Very much like Anora, she isn't what people would think when they think about what she does for work. She's so much more, and so does Igor. And she kind of confronts him, and she says, you know, you would have raped me if Garnick hadn't come in when he did, when you had me tied up. And he's like, of course I wouldn't have. That's not who I am. And the scene kind of ends. And then he drives Anora back, and she's in his car. And this is sort of, again, where we see these class systems and stuff. Like, his car is his grandmother's. You know, he isn't this like billionaire's son. He isn't just having everything handed to him. Like, he's just kind of a working class guy. And I don't also consider Anora to be just like a working class girl. Just what she does for work is not what normally people consider to be a viable career, but she provides for herself, so nobody should be able to pass judgment on her, in my opinion. So they get to her house, and he has actually stolen her engagement ring to great risk for himself, and he gives it to her. And he gets out of the car, and he grabs her bags and goes upstairs to her stoop. And I think this is where we start to see every interaction Anora has through the whole film with any sort of man is very transactional. This for that, exchange of sex for money, exchange of feelings for getting married, all these things, exchange of annulment for $10,000. Everything's in exchange. Find Vanya to get her way. It's all these things. And this is the first non-transactional interaction she's had with any man. Igor is giving her this ring because it's the right thing to do, and he feels bad. And he sort of apologizes on Vanya's behalf for his own sake. He just needs her to know that somebody else sees that that was horrible. And he, goes up the step and she doesn't follow him. We just see this close-up of Mikey Madison's face. And you can see that from Igor, this isn't an interaction that he needs anything for. He's just doing this because it's the right thing to do. And she takes it because he's a man, because of her experiences in life, especially what she's just experienced. She takes it as a transaction. So when he comes back in the car, she initiates sex with him. And as it starts, she's viewing this as transactional payment for the ring. And he's not. He likes her, and he goes to kiss her, and she resists very much. And then he holds her, and he's looking at her, and he's really seeing her. And she realizes this act of intimacy, that it wasn't this transaction, that he really does care, and she just collapses in full body grief sobs about what's happened to her. This building up and shattering in this judgment that she's received from this very powerful family and this huge lie. And then now this person that she was very afraid of, that tried to do all these, essentially held her hostage, showing her this act of kindness in this reaching out of intimacy and really being seen without any judgment. And it's just too much, and she collapses. And the movie ends. And I just thought it was outstanding, especially that scene. It's a 1-2 gut punch at the end. And it just leaves it sort of ambiguous from there. What happens? Do her and Igor sort of pursue what's happening? Is this just the last interaction they have, and that's just a weird forever memory? Does she go back to the club? Does she feel embarrassed about what's happened and move clubs? We don't know. It's a very ambiguous ending. But for me, I found it such an honest portrayal of grief in a breakup when you felt like you were promised something and it shattered in your face. I think all of us on some level have an understanding of that if you've been through quite a big breakup or quite a bad one. Although I've never been through anything like that. But on some level, I think we all have been through a breakup where it felt like a promise that we were given that just blew up in our faces, and we've been left embarrassed about how it went down, about our own behavior, about our own naivety, about the way the other person treated us, and then on reflection being how was I dumb enough to let this happen? All that stuff, all that feeling. And it was just expertly, the way Mikey Madison collapsed, it was she collapsed into my own feelings. It was amazing. Please go see this film. It was wonderful. Mikey Madison was incredible. They were all incredible. Sean Baker, the way he captured realness was amazing. Yeah, so thank you so much. Please remember to like this, comment, subscribe to the newsletter, check out Reels and Tunes every Monday. Generally on the podcast, there's thoughts that come to me afterwards, so I'll deep dive in there. Thank you so much. And thank you everybody for the support. Check out the new website. Happy Thursday.